So welcome everyone, and we're going to continue tonight to look at Daniel 7. We got through much of it last week. We've been through Daniel 2. I want to finish up Daniel 7, and then we're going to move right into Daniel chapter 9, which I think is certainly one of the more fascinating prophecies in the Bible. So in Daniel 7, we went through and we identified who the beasts are that Daniel saw in his dream. God interpreted who they are, and it's the same empires, primarily empires to come, that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream that were interpreted by Daniel in chapter 2. Now, Daniel has a dream, and he basically sees the same empires that are depicted as beasts. And so we've identified those. We know that it began with Babylon, then the Mede-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and then there's a 10-member offshoot, if you will, of the Roman Empire yet to come. And that's what we're going to spend a little more time talking about tonight. And of course, in Daniel 7, we saw the prophecy of the little horn, which is in verse, let's see, I think we look at verse 7 of Daniel 7. After that, in my vision at night, referring to his dream, I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth, and it crushed and devoured its victims. This is a reference to Rome, which was one of the most brutal empires in the history of the world. It just came in and just ravaged anything that was in front of it, trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all of the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. So this fourth beast, Rome, has an extension, which is the 10 horns. This is a reference to the 10-nation empire, or the empire that's going to come at the end of the age. It's yet to come. We have not seen the fulfillment of the 10 toes, which we saw in Daniel chapter 2, or the 10 horns, which represent what we have here depicted are 10 leaders who will be part of this 10-member nation. And we don't know specifically how that's going to come about, but it seems very likely that the center of the empire will be probably in Europe somewhere. It's very interesting that Brussels, which has been the capital of the European Union, has a statue outside of it, which is exactly what we read about in Revelation 17. It's a statue of a woman riding on the back of a bull. It's a statue that's right there. And that's exactly what we read in Revelation 17, or is it, I think it's, 17, where it talks about a woman riding a beast. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. That Brussels has this image. And of course, the euro has that same image on its coins. So that's just not a coincidence that could happen, in my view. And also, we have a part of their emblem, of the European Empire's emblem, is a picture of the Tower of Babel that was under construction. It was a famous picture that was painted, I think, many years ago, of a half-completed tower. And, of course, God came along, and that's where he confounded the language and scattered the people originally, because they were trying to come together as one people. They were of one language, and they were building this tower to get to the stars, if you could, which they were worshiping. And it was paganism at its worst. And that's really where that really started in Babylon, which is the beginning where all of the false religions actually have their start. And of course, we get to Revelation, we see a reference to Babylon again. We have two references to Babylon. We have literal Babylon, which will be likely a real city, and what some translations call the Whore of Babylon, which is going to be a false religious system that'll coincide with this 10-member nation. So you can't really have a religious, or you really can't have an economic, political system without a religious system accompanying it. So we see a reference to that clearly in Revelation 13 and then beyond that. And then in verse 8, while I was thinking about the horns, which again, a reference to, and we'll see that Daniel had a lot of questions about these horns. Because I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up from among them. So what we have here is a picture of this rather innocuous, inconspicuous horn coming on the scene, kind of small, and as we see in Revelation 6, when Antichrist comes on the scene, he comes on riding a white horse, which symbolizes peace. He's carrying a bow but no arrow, and so he is going to be very good at deceiving the world and establishing and coming on the scene, likely very well, absolutely after the rapture occurs. He's going to come on the scene. He's not going to come on the scene before the rapture. We in this room will never see or be able to know who Antichrist is. So a little horn, and the horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth that spoke boastfully. And so clearly, it's a person. This is an individual. The little horn is a person. It's a reference to the Antichrist, who has many different types or many different names throughout the Bible. He is the destroyer. He's the evil one. He's the beast. He's the Antichrist. I think there's 33 different titles given to him throughout the Bible. As I looked, thrones, and we read this last week, so we'll just go through it quickly. Thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. So this is a reference to what's going on in heaven. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair on his head was as white as wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. It's all obviously symbolic language. And you get a picture very similar to this in Revelation chapter 4, 3 and 4, and 5 of what's going on in heaven at the very, just before and at the beginning of the tribulation. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. So now we're jumping ahead a little bit to the end of the millennium or the 1,000-year reign, when the books are going to be open and people are going to be judged at what's called the Great White Throne Judgment. That's a judgment at the end of the 1,000-year tribulation that is for non-believers throughout history. We're all going to stand there, and these books are going to be opened, and every deed, everything they've ever done will have been recorded. And so you can almost picture God sitting there, and we've talked about this before, but God sitting there and saying, okay, what did you do to deserve to go into heaven? Well, I was a good person, I did this. And Christians, our names are recorded in what's called the Book of Life, the Lamb's Book of Life, which he will also have. And the answer to anybody that thinks or feels that they can make a case because of their works and good deeds or whatever, or their false religious or world views, that they're going to stand before God and he's going to say, I'm sorry, that's just not what is required. You heard the gospel, mentioned to you 30 times throughout your life. And those that heard it and accepted it, their names are recorded in the Book of Life. Yours aren't. Your works are all recorded here. But they're not good enough to cause you or to allow you to enter into heaven. So that's really what's being referred to here. So it kind of jumps around a little bit. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. And I'll turn quickly, keep your finger here, and turn to Isaiah chapter 14. And this is Isaiah 14, contains a number of what many refers to as the I wills, what Satan is all about, and find it here. Okay, if we go to Isaiah chapter 14, and beginning in verse 12, where it says, "How you have fallen from heaven," referring to Satan, "O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth, you who once laid low the nation." So this is a reference to Satan, who was cast out of heaven. And then it goes on to say, "You said in your heart," and notice how many times we see the words "I will." This is what Satan is all about. You said, "I will ascend to heaven." In other words, his goal, his objective is to become like the Most High, like God, to replace him. So I will ascend to heaven. That's Satan. "I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly, on the outmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." So that's what Satan is. He's jealous, and he wants to be not like God, but above God, and have God under his feet. But then it goes on to say, "But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pits." To the pit. So Satan may have all these goals and objectives, and because of his evil nature, that's still what he's attempting to do. And as we're going to see, he's going to attempt to accomplish these various I wills through the Antichrist. And if we go back to Daniel, verse 11 of chapter 7, we see, "Then," this is Daniel, "I continued to watch because of the boastful words." There was boasting about how great he is. The horn was speaking. "I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire." So I think we mentioned this last week, but when Jesus returns at the end of the tribulation, one of the first things he's going to do is he's going to go to battle with all the nations that are going to come against Jerusalem in the valley of Armageddon or Megiddo or Jezreel. And he's going to defeat these armies to the point where, as we read in Revelation, the blood will be up to the horses' bridles. It's going to be pretty astounding. And Jesus is going to do it, as we read later in Daniel, and he's going to do it himself. He's not going to need any help to destroy these armies that will be at that time under the control of Antichrist. And as we get toward the end of the tribulation, the Antichrist will very likely be possessed by Satan himself. And so it says here, "I continue to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking." And that's what it is. It's pride. When you see all this about boasting and pride, you know that's the Antichrist. "I kept looking until the beast was slain and his body destroyed." And so what I was going to say is that when Jesus returns, after he destroys these nations, he's going to take the Antichrist and the false prophet and immediately cast them into the lake of fire. And at the end of the 1,000-year reign, Satan also will be cast into the lake of fire. And it's interesting that when you read this account in Revelation 19 and so forth, where Jesus comes back and physically throws those two, the first ones ever, to be thrown directly into the lake of fire. And then 1,000 years later, Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, and the word says where the Antichrist and the false prophet already were. So that's 1,000 years later, and they're still there, suffering and being, going through what they're going through in the lake of fire when Satan is ultimately thrown in. So that helps us to come to grips with the fact that 1,000 years is a long time, and so it's just the beginning, though, for the torment they're going to go through. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. So as we get further into the tribulation, even though it starts out as a 10-member nation, and we see the false religious system begin to develop, as time goes on, Antichrist is going to take total control of everything, including those other kings and leaders that are going to start out in the tribulation with it. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached, this is a reference to Jesus, because he is obviously came the first time as the Son of Man, Son of God and the Son of Man. So here we are, roughly 600 years or so BC, give or take, and we have yet another prophecy about Jesus Christ before he even came on the scene as the Son of Man.
And where is this?
Pardon me?
Where is this?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in verse 13. Yeah. And there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion, that of Jesus Christ, given the authority by God the Father, is everlasting, that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. I mean, that's powerful. If you think about it, forever. And we're going to be there with him. Because why? Our names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And we're not going to go through the judgment seat, or the great light throne.
I have a question, and it might sound stupid, but the way I look at it is Satan is a spirit that tries to constantly come in, not in human form, but in a spirit. I could be off, but this is the way I've been looking at it, is Satan is a spirit that's coming in. But when I was rebaptized and I gave my life to God, Jesus, and I admitted to my sins, what scares me is, did I forget anything? That when that book of life comes up, will I be rejected also?
No. See, it's very clear throughout the New Testament, that our sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. You know, if I try to remember every sin I ever committed, I'm toast. But he covers those. That's what the shed blood does. It covers our sins. Those that we can remember, those we can't. And so, no, you don't have to worry about that at all. Every sin has been forgiven. I mean, imagine if you just think about that logically. If you had to confess everything you've ever done, and oh boy, I missed one. You know what? That's what the Muslims fear. Muslims fear, their fear is, and this is the same with any works-based religion, and the difference between Islam and works-based religion, Christianity, is we're under grace. We're under grace because of what he did for us. And there's nothing that can take that away. No sin. But you take Muslims, they're living each day worried that their good deeds may not outdo their bad deeds. And then if Allah just happens to be in a foul mood on that particular day, even if their bad deeds are not, their good deeds do outweigh the bad deeds, they still don't have a guarantee. But none of us have to worry about that.
Because I know at night, I'm not perfect, and I make sins. And I always ask God at night to forgive me. And one of my worst one is my mouth. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
That silver tongue will come through. And then afterwards, I'm asking him to forgive me, because that's not the godly way.
Right.
But it just was, I was laying in bed and trying to think of every possible sin, because you know, he's coming to judge, and the evil are going to die. And
So he requests that we acknowledge that we're sinners, that we have sinned. The Bible says we have all sinned and fall short of the glory. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. And in God's eyes, there's no degrees of sin. We're just sinners. And so he came, went to the cross, and the last thing he said just before he died is, "It is finished," which means debt paid in full. That's exactly when he said, "It is finished," means debt paid in full. There's nothing more that could be done. And so, if he were to say debt paid, if he had said, if we could still be convicted because of one sin, this, there, or the other thing, this, there, or the other thing, he would have said, most of it has been, most of the debts have been paid in full. Not all, but the big ones, or some of the debts. But he said the debt, which is sin. You know, we're all sinners, which means that we all have taken on the curse that we've inherited from Adam and Eve, and that's really what we're forgiven for, is that original sin that we all have, not the individual. That's just part of the program. We're forgiven of everything. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't confess. You know, I believe that it's possible that our sin can separate us temporarily from His love if we're not reading the Word, if we're not asking for forgiveness. But that doesn't mean that we're not saved, right? So.
And there's also the sanctification process.
there's
Where God is working on your heart to get rid of that problem. Or you said a little bit too much, maybe, or you overreacted, or you judge somebody not righteously. So those are kind of things that you just ask the Lord that He will reveal the things that He wants you to work on, and He will be there with you every step of the way.
And that's what I try to do every night, you know, is ask Him to forgive me for whatever I've done. You know.
After you do that, look that up.
Okay, thank you.
It tells you what you should think about. Philippians 4.
It's impossible to be totally free of sin. I mean, we're subjected to, thinking bad thoughts even sometimes. We don't even have to speak it, and that's sinful. So what happens is the Lord lays that on our heart. It's a spiritual thing within us of bringing it to our attention so we can strive to be more like Him. And that is our goal, to each day be more like Him and to evangelize. So it's just the Lord working in your heart, and you thank Him every day.
And I'm sorry if I interrupted.
No, those are the types of questions we all have. We all have
Thank
those.
you for sharing. I liked hearing all the answers. And I benefited from that too. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have too. I mean, I think that's something we all do. All right, so verse 15. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit. And, put ourselves in Daniel's spot. Daniel is looking forward. And we're going to see later, we won't see it, but in chapter 12, it says that the prophecies he was given would be sealed up, which means they wouldn't be easy or able to be understood until later on. And so he's troubled by all of these things that he sees, and so he's trying to figure it out. He's basically going to be told by Gabriel and others that he deals with, don't worry about it, Daniel. But we today, we can look back in history and say, oh, wait a minute. All of the things that Daniel saw took place. Now, if we know for a fact that there was a Babylon, of course, he was there during the Babylonian time, and he was there during the early Mede-Persian time. He wasn't there during the time of the Greek Empire or the Roman Empire, but he sees all of these things unfolding, and we look back and say, yeah, it's exactly what's happened. I mean, if you get into, we're not going to do that, but if you study chapter 11, there are prophecies in there that depict precisely Alexander the Great and the 4 generals he deeded his empire to, and Cleopatra, all of these historical figures that he saw, that were revealed to him. We look back in history and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what's happened. And so if we've got the evidence of all these things that have been fulfilled, and we know that there's a 10-member nation to come and an Antichrist to come, we've got the absolute certainty that these things will take place because of fulfilled prophecy. That's what fulfilled prophecy does. It helps us to come to the realization this thing's got to be true. This isn't just a book of fables. No. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretations of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. So when Jesus comes back, he is going to we're going to be dressed in white robes and new bodies that we've talked about, incorruptible, no pain, no sadness, none of the bad things that people go through naturally throughout the course of the earth, and we are going to possess this kingdom forever and ever. This is eternity. Forever and ever and ever means just that, eternity. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. So this is a reference to Rome, which was yet to come. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. So again, we got these 10 horns, out of which are 10 nations, 10 leaders, however it's configured, out of which comes the Antichrist, who's the little horn. And it appears from this, and we see it confirmed again in Revelation, that he is going to probably have to defeat 3 of the 10, that they're not going to willingly come along. And so that's what is being depicted here. The horn that looked more imposing the others, that had eyes and mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them. Okay, so let's just keep our fingers there and go to the book of Matthew. I think we'll see something pretty interesting here. Matthew chapter 16. So what we see here is Antichrist waging war against the saints and defeating them. And we know throughout the New Testament, believers are occasionally referred to as saints. So this is a reference to...
What verse?
Pardon me?
What verse?
16 verses 18. So in chapter 16, or Matthew chapter 16, over in verse 18, let's start in verse 17. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven." And he goes on to say, "And I tell you, Peter, on this rock I will build my church." And the Catholic Church says that the rock has to be Peter, but that's not true. Jesus is always the rock. So he's saying, I am going to build my church. That doesn't mean the Presbyterians or the Baptists or the Catholics or this. It's believers. The church is the body of Christ. All believers, all that from the time of Pentecost, when the church was started, through today and into the future, everybody that accepts Christ, we're all part of the church. So he says, and that's what's interesting. I think about places like China. We talked last week how China is really trying to hold down Christianity over there with all kinds of new rules and regulations. They're scared to death of it. They think they can block Christianity, but as I said last week, I kind of say, look at God saying, okay, take your best shot. Because he says, I'm going to build my church, and nothing's going to stop it. So when he says, I'm going to build my church, That's precisely what he's going to do, even in places like Iran and Syria and China and other Christian rejecting places. But that's another story for another day. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So if you read that, the gates of Hades, or Satan, is not going to overcome it. But then if we go back to Daniel, as we just read, and we see it also repeated in Revelation, I watched this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them. Well, I thought Jesus said it was not going to, the gates of Hades would not overcome it. So it seems to be a contradiction. The answer lies in the fact that the saints that are referred to in Daniel 7, chapter 20, or chapter 7, verse 21 here, are people that come to know Christ during the tribulation. This is not us. All right, we're a member, we're the church. The church is going to be removed at the rapture, but during the tribulation, there will still be, as we read in Revelation, multitudes coming from every tongue, nation, tribe that will accept Jesus Christ during the tribulation. But the penalty, or what's going to happen to a lot of those people during the tribulation, because they won't take the mark of the beast. You can't be a Christian and take the mark of the beast. So if they don't take the mark of the beast and they've accepted Christ during the tribulation, and even though the church is gone, there's still God's Spirit going to be operating a little differently than it does today. Today it indwells us as the body. And then it's going to be more like it functioned during the time of David. It's going to be there ministering to people, but not indwelling, at least during that period of time. And so there's going to be those who will go out after the church is removed. God can't be without a remnant. And so he is going to identify 144,000 Jewish believers that are going to go out and evangelize the world at that time, during the time of the tribulation. So there are going to be people that are going to accept him, and so they are the ones that are going to be defeated, at least physically, not eternally, because of their faith during the tribulation. Until the Ancient of Days comes and pronounces judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. So obviously, people that accept Christ during the tribulation, just like us, they're ultimately going to be with us during the kingdom and beyond into eternity. But they're going to be going through some very difficult times. So this defeating them is only going to be on a temporary basis.
I'm confused. I don't understand the connection that you're making between the two books. So in Matthew, when it says that Satan wouldn't overcome the church, that's talking about everyone, or that's talking about all the believers. I don't see the connection between that. And then in Daniel, it's talking about a battle between the 3 of the 10 nations. Wait, have to overcome 3 of the 10 nations. How? That doesn't sound like the same battle. I don't understand.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. There are different battles going on. Antichrist is going to be over call it the economic political system that's going to exist during the tribulation. He's going to be the leader. Call him the world leader, the leader of the world. Kind of call him the prime minister or president of the world, who is going to make Adolf Hitler look like a choir boy. And because of all of his anti-God attributes, he's going to inherit all the I wills that we just read about in Isaiah 14. He's just going to detest anybody and anything that has any relationship whatsoever to Jesus Christ. And so while he is going to control the world and take over and run the world in an absolutely vicious way, he's also going to be out doing everything he can to defeat every single Christian that comes, or every person that comes to Christ during the tribulation. So it's kind of a couple different things going on at the same time.
Okay, I see. But then but then like for Matthew, before the tribulation, Satan can't win because.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Satan,
Okay.
Satan can oppress us and he can tempt us and do all these things, but he can't control us right now because we have the Holy Spirit within us. And the Bible says, and the New Testament says, greater is he, the Holy Spirit, that's in us than he that's in the world. And when we talk about the world and the institutions of the world, that's a reference to Satan and the control that he currently has spiritually over the world. Okay? So he can't overcome us. But he's going to have his way for a short period of time. And what we read here, where it says waging war against the states and defeating them, is only temporary. It's like 3 years, 3.5 years that's going to take place.
During the tribulation.
During
We're
the
not
tri-
here.
yeah. And so we haven't explained the tribulation in great detail yet. We're getting to that. So that's probably a little fuzzy too.
Thank you. That helps.
Yeah. So it says that in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. Well, that's a reference to Rome. It didn't control the whole earth, but at that time, the known world was primarily pretty much under the control of the Roman Empire, and it was a vicious, horrible empire. Then it goes on to say the 10 horns, which, if you read back in Daniel, or in Daniel 2, the 10 horns and the 10 toes are synonymous. So you've got the 2 legs, and then the toes, which are an extension of the 10 legs, which is why we know and why many refer to this 10 horn kingdom as the revived Roman Empire. It's an extension of Rome. Now Rome, as we said before, was never defeated like Assyria and Babylon and Medo-Persia and Egypt and all the other in Greece. The Roman Empire lasted for quite a while and ultimately just fell. It's never been defeated. It was just kind of like it's been lying dormant, waiting for the time. And that's one of the things Adolf Hitler was all about. He tried to be the leader of the revived Roman Empire, and it wasn't the time. But Antichrist is going to do just that. He is going to be the leader of you won't see the term revived Roman Empire in the Bible, but it's a term that comes from what we're reading here. So, and that's going to be the center of the political, economic, religious system. And again, what we're seeing through the coming together of all these nations in the European kingdom, or the European community, or the European Union, is, I believe, a foreshadowing at a minimum of what's being prophesied here.
Are you talking about the Super 7?
The Super 7.
I don't know if you've ever heard of them. There's supposedly going to be 7 that are going to rule. And this is coming soon.
Well, you have the 10 members and 3 are going to be defeated. So maybe that's what that means. The remaining 7 there'll be the Antichrist who will have 7 others that will be underneath him, 7 leaders. I don't know if that's what that means. They also have a reference to the 7 hills, which that's probably Rome, which is another subject, another topic that is covered in
plagues.
Yeah, and then you have the 7 seals and the 7 bowls and the 7, all the various trumpets. So I don't know exactly.
Sorry,
Yeah, no, that's all right. All right. So that goes on to say the 10 horns are 10 kingdoms, or 10 kings who come from this kingdom. Then, after then, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. This is Antichrist again. He will speak against the Most High. And it's ultimately going to get to the point where Antichrist will commit what Jesus referred to as the abomination of desolation. What the abomination of desolation is, as we'll see in a moment when we get to Daniel chapter 9 and other places, the abomination of desolation is when the false prophet, who's going to be basically Antichrist's helper, if you will, during the tribulation, will have an image created, a statue of Antichrist, and placed in the new temple, in the Holy of Holies, which the Holy of Holies is the most sacred place in the Jewish temple. He's going to have this image placed in the Holy of Holies at precisely the midpoint of the tribulation, at the 3.5-year mark. So that's what Jesus referred to as the abomination of desolation. Another king will arise, different from the earlier ones, so he's going to come from this 10-member nation, which is different than Rome, Greece, Mede, Persia, etc. He will subdue 3, so he's going to force 3 of the 10 to comply and to follow him. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the saints. He hates Jesus Christ. What we see coming here is kind of a false trinity, if you will. You've got Satan, you've got the Antichrist, and then you have the false prophet. So kind of like Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, you're going to have this false trinity that will be basically controlling things, and everything's going to be under the control of Satan during this period of time.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, so when the abomination and desolation, when they put that statue up, is that when the Jews realize it's not actually?
Yes.
Okay, so that's like the turning point.
Right.
Okay, and then the second part is, I've been wondering this the entire class actually. What's the difference between the Antichrist and the false prophet?
2 different people. Antichrist is the leader of the world. The false prophet's going to be the religious head of the world. The false prophet's going to be a religious leader that will support, he's a real person, that will support the Antichrist and be the head of probably a false ecumenical system that will exist during the time of the tribulation. It's referred to as the system itself, the religious system, is depicted as a whore. A whore or a prostitute in the Old Testament depicted false religious systems or false belief systems, like paganism. That's what Babylon was all about. And so he is going to be the head of this false religious system, an ecumenical system. And it's interesting, we're seeing ecumenism under people like the Pope today and others beginning to bring this whole ecumenical system together. It's in the works. And so he, the false prophet, is going to support the Antichrist. The false prophet's the one that will actually have the image of the Antichrist placed into the Holy of Holies. He's going to be able to call fire down from heaven. He's going to have all kinds of power. But ultimately, Antichrist will turn on him too.
So I know you've said that you believe that Antichrist is alive today. So that would mean the false prophet is also alive too.
Probably. Yeah. Okay, verse 25. He will speak against the Most High. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's interesting that one of their main colors is purple. Yeah. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. He's going to try to upset everything. When we talk about set times and laws, I mean, the set times, I believe, are already designated times for his demise, which would be when Jesus comes back. He's not going to be able to change those things, but that's really what he's all about. He's under the power of Satan, so Satan is going to do everything in his power to change God's ultimate plan and his laws, and so on and so forth, but he's not going to succeed. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and a half time. So what does that mean? That the saints during the tribulation, as we said, are those people that come to know him, know Jesus during the tribulation, And a time is a year, times is 2 years, and a half a time is a half a year. So what we have depicted here is a period of 3.5 years. So the tribulation is going to be 7 years long. Midway through the tribulation, like Megan just mentioned, Antichrist is going to turn on the Jewish people. He's going to establish a covenant early at the beginning, turn on them at the midpoint. The midpoint is when Satan is cast out of heaven, when the abomination of desolation takes place, and Antichrist's true colors. I think very likely the Jewish people, remember the Orthodox Jews and Jews believe or don't believe that Jesus has come. And so, but they think that Messiah is yet to come. They didn't believe Jesus because Jesus was supposed to set up his kingdom right then and there. They didn't realize that he had to be a servant, and then later he'd come the second time to set up his kingdom. He came as a servant, but when he comes back, he'll be the lion from the tribe of Judah. So it had to be two different comings, but they didn't see it. So very likely, they will believe that Antichrist is their Messiah, and they will fall right behind him.
You think like the Pharisees knew that Christ was the Messiah? They knew the Old Testament by heart.
Yeah.
They knew Isaiah.
They knew Isaiah. They didn't know Daniel, as we'll see, Daniel 9, or they would have recognized him, I think. I don't think so. No. No, again, they were looking for one to come to take, because remember, he was referred to as the King of the Jews. And that's why Herod went after all the young boys, because he was the king. And so Herod, something's going on in his brain. I mean, why worry about somebody that comes along and claims to be king unless he thought maybe he really was possibly going to take over the Jewish people? But the Pharisees, no. I don't think so. No
I
way.
thought they were jealous.
Nicodemus did. Yeah, Nicodemus did, but the others no. So he is going to have control of the saints up to where it says he's going to defeat them. Again, not those that are, not us. This is a different group of saints for a time, and a half time. So they're going to be under his control for a period of 3.5 years. And I want to wait and get into Matthew a little bit when we get to Daniel 9, because some real interesting things that take place when this last 3.5 year period comes about. But the court will sit and his power will be taken away, completely destroyed forever. So in other words, Satan is doomed, the Antichrist is doomed. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. That's us. We're told we're going to rule and reign with him. So this verifies that. His kingdom will be his kingdom, Jesus' kingdom, the Son of Man, will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. We're going to do so willingly. I mean, you talk about, we're going to be worshiping Jesus Christ and God the Father throughout eternity. We're not going to be forced to do it like Antichrist is going to force people to worship him. But we're going to do it because we love Jesus Christ and he loves us beyond anything we can even imagine. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled. I mean, he saw an awful lot. And it had to shake him to the core. By my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. He recorded it for us today, but to him, at that time, it really didn't mean a whole heck of a lot. Okay? So with that, we got maybe 5 minutes left. Let's flip over to Daniel chapter 9. We're going to skip over chapter 8, although there is something I wanted to read in chapter 8. Beginning in, let's just take a look in chapter 8 and begin in verse 9. Just take a look at chapter 8, and we'll finish with this. I don't think we really have enough time to get into the chapter 9. We'll do that next week. So in chapter 8, verse 9, out of them came another horn, another reference to the Antichrist, which started small. He's going to be innocuous. And think about this. When we get to the rapture, we're all sitting here today. We all know or will know when we go through Daniel chapter 9 that when this leader out of the revived Roman Empire someplace in Europe, enters into probably a peace treaty with Israel. That's exactly what we're going to see in Daniel 9. That if we were to witness that, say we're watching on Fox News or whatever we watch it, we're watching this event take place. If we were still here, knowing what we know and will know from Daniel 9 and other places, what would we do? We'd say, that's exactly what the scripture says. That's got to be the Antichrist. But yet it says here, in chapter 8, let's see here, out of them came another horn which started small. It started small. So he's got to come on as a deceiver, and we see reference to that in other places. Deceiving the world. He's going to have all the answers. The world's going to be in a state of far worse than it is now, in chaos and problems and wars and famines and all these other things. The church will be gone. The church is gone. And you think about the horror that's going to cause when millions of people just suddenly disappear. And so if we were here, we would expose him. We would say, that's the Antichrist, but he can't afford to have his name or to have his identity exposed, or he's not going to be able to accomplish what he accomplishes. So if the church were here, then that's what we would do. And so that's just kind of an introduction, one of the many, I think, evidences when we get to it that this rapture we keep talking about has to happen before the tribulation actually starts. It has to. It cannot be mid, it can't be post, it can't be pre-ret. It has to happen, or we would give him away. It grew, east and toward the beautiful land, which is toward Israel. Again, his goal, and we're going to see that in Matthew, Satan's goal during the tribulation is primarily going to be to wipe out every Jew on the face of the earth. Just like the Muslims want to do today, just like Hitler tried to do, Antichrist is going to go after them under the direction of Satan with a vengeance. Why? Because they're God's chosen people. And God has a plan to redeem and to restore. That's really one of the primary purposes of the coming tribulation, is to redeem, to restore Israel. And so he knows that when Jesus comes back, there's a scripture in a prophecy in Romans that says, all Israel will be saved. That's the objective of the tribulation, is for all Israel, or those that are around at the time, to be saved. If he could destroy every Jew, then that wouldn't be possible. Then that would negate the reason for God's actual tribulation and coming back. So he's going to go after the beautiful land. It grew, Antichrist, until it reached the host of heavens. And it threw some of the starry host down to earth and trampled on them. So this is, I think, a reference to what we read in Joel and other places about the moon turning blood red and fire being called on. There's going to be a lot of things that he's going to have power, supernatural power, as will the false prophet, that will only help to convince the world that he is the one. And they see all these miracles take place, we call them miracles or things, supernatural things he does, and they're going to follow right behind him. It set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. So he's going to set himself up, like I said earlier, to be like the Most High. His goal is to replace. Antichrist doesn't mean against Christ necessarily. It means in place of. And so he is going to attempt to be the Messiah. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of the sanctuary was brought low. We'll see that in greater detail when we get to chapter 9. Because of rebellion, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifices were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. So you talk about moral relativism and all of these things that are taking place today. This is going to be the consummate, ultimate, hey, if it feels good, do it culture. That everybody is going to, that's what he's going to be. He's going to lead people astray. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? Well, we're now at the point where we're getting pretty close to those 10 horns being revealed in history. But this is 2,600 years ago that this question's being asked. The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, there's another reference to the abomination of desolation that takes place at the midpoint of the tribulation. And the surrender of the sanctuary. The sanctuary is a reference to the temple. The temple, it doesn't exist today, but it will during the tribulation. So the temple will be rebuilt. It's going to be. How it happens, we don't know, but we know everything necessary to do it has been done. So it's ready to go. And the host that will be trampled underfoot. He said unto me, it'll take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. So this is a reference to the amount of time from the midpoint of the tribulation till when Jesus comes back, likely cleanses the earth, and so it's going to be 2,300 days from the abomination until when Jesus comes back and sits on his throne. A little over 3.5 years. People always wonder, well, 3.5 years is 1,260 days or whatever. So what does this really mean? And so it's a reference to the last 3.5 or possibly even all the tribulation up until the time Jesus comes and ultimately sits upon his throne. Okay? Questions? Comments? Next week, we're going to look at Daniel 9, which has one of the most, I believe, the most amazing
Are we going to have that special?
I'm sorry,
I thought we're having
next week is missions. Yeah, that's next week, so it'll be the following week.
Yeah, in the book of signs, there was a chapter on Antichrist. That was everything.
Pardon me?
In the book of signs, chapter on Antichrist.
Oh, yeah.
Why he came,
Yep, right.
where he going,
Yeah, he's referring to a book David Jeremiah wrote.
on the hot wheels.
Yeah, book Jeremiah wrote it's entitled The Book of Signs. It's a good book, so if you know,
I think the best book he ever written.
it was good, very well done. So, anything else? Questions, comments?